We're very happy to have you back, even for a short visit.
Hello, everybody. Edward O'Hare, nickname to be determined here, for a very special episode of the Wicked Theory podcast. I'm joined by our fearless leader, Mr. Bill Sweeney.
Hello, hello.
And, so this is just something, for those, about a week ago, acclaimed writer Harlan Ellison wrote thousands of short stories and novels and some of the best TV, the 60s, but really known for his sci-fi, fantasy, and mystery work, passed away. And it was just one of those characters in American pop culture who just, I don't know, always stood out to me. Bill, I don't know if you're familiar with him much.
No, I'm pretty familiar with him. He was one of those things where he's the kind of guy who, when you first find out about him, he's already angry, and
yes,
and then you're like, oh, then you find out more, and you're like, oh, he wrote that, he wrote this,
yeah,
he's got a lot of key science fiction and some really unique writings in his history,
Yeah, and just basically kind of as a tribute to him, I wanted to do a little reading of one of my favorite stories of his. It's a personal essay, but he gives 3 long anecdotes in it. He's someone I first discovered on Sci-Fi Buzz, which those of you don't remember, when the Sci-Fi Channel was actually the science fiction channel,
right?
And they had a show called Sci-Fi Buzz, which was like their version of Entertainment Weekly. Entertainment Tonight, right? Kind of, except they had to do it once a week because it's sci-fi. You don't have that much to talk about every day. They would give him like a 3-minute segment just to rant about whatever he wanted.
Sure. A little piece of grandpa at the end.
Yeah,
I got you.
And it was just someone and come across in writings. And this particular story I first heard actually at a speech competition. It won the middle portion of it won prose reading at the college NFA Nationals. So it was NFAs. Sarah Netzley will understand that, and no one else.
Okay, fair enough.
Actually, it was the student who was reading it was from Bradley University, where Sarah Netzley teaches, and it's one that just it just, the thing about his writing is it's so descriptive, and the similes that he comes up with, and just the way that he paints a picture, it draws you right into the story. And I always found that fascinating. And I'm reading it from a collection from the early 80s called Stalking The Nightmare.
Sure.
I believe this story first appeared in We magazine. Were you reading We in 1978?
No. Well, not in 1978. I don't think I'm not sure if I was reading yet in 1978. But it does sound like something I would read at some point, though.
Oh, yeah.
Stalking the Nightmare. Like if I had seen that in the library at school or something like that, I think that would have came right off the shelf. But that's the thing. I got hooked on Stephen King right away from home. But if there had been Harlan Ellison in the house, like my mother only read like a couple of fiction writers, that I was interested in, and it was just the mainstream big name horror stuff. She read a ton of stuff, but she never really kind of got into some of this kind of like left of center kind of multi, like almost like sometimes he'll write something that's a little bit more horror, a little bit science fiction. Harlan Ellison, he's kind of multifaceted in that way, And sometimes I think slice of life type of stuff too. Sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Because I know he would write these essays. Sometimes they were just kind of like, they're not even about anything weird necessarily.
Yeah. And it's funny. Stephen King actually writes the foreword to this anthology.
Nice. Yeah. See that? Can't get away from
him. Yeah. It's so. I don't want to waste much time. And I think we're gonna enjoy this.
Okay.
I've been practicing a little bit
All right.
working on some particular voices that are going to be in here. And
okay.
you know, I'm not the reader that Ellison is, but
Sure.
but you know, I'm going to do my best and
Try to do the story justice.
yeah, and you know, he was also a very litigious guy.
Right.
So as an offering,
To his ghost and his spirit.
yes, I am going to be making a $100 donation to the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund in his name.
Oh, wow.
And if you look at his website, which hasn't been updated in a while,
Sure.
but it does mention twice on that website within the same
Right.
paragraph that he encourages people to donate to that. So Comic Book Legal Defense Fund
And I'll
does.
mention to anybody that may be interested in, like, my Amazon account
Yeah.
is hooked up because Amazon has this thing called Smile.
Yeah.
And you can set up any charity to donate to as you make regular purchases. And it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
Amazon will donate in your name. And it's like, so like over the course of a couple of years, I've donated a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? But Comic Book Legal Defense Fund is actually the one that my Smile account on Amazon is set up to.
Yeah.
So, but CBLDF.
Yes.
If anybody's wants to know more about the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund,
Yes. Yeah. They do great work.
they do.
So, are you ready, Bill?
Yeah, sure, buddy. Let's do this.
All right. So this story is called "The 3 Most Important Things in Life." I've looked everywhere, and I'll be damned if I could find it. But I know I read that passage somewhere. I think in Kerouac, but I can't locate it now. So you'll just have to go along with me that it's there. Would I lie to you? It's a scene in which a young supplicant, an aspiring poet, somebody like that, seeks out his knowledgeable old philosopher, kind of a Bukowski or Henry Miller figure in Paris or New York or some such bustling metropolitan cities. And the kid comes to the old guru in this ratty apartment, and he sorta, kinda asks him that old saw about the meaning of life. Correction, life, capital L-I-F-E. He squats there and says to the old man, "What's it all about? What's it mean, huh?" And the old man purses his lips and beetles his brow. He perceives the kid is really serious about this. It's not just jerk-off time. So he nods sagely and clasps his hands behind his back, and he walks to the window and stares out at the deep city for a while, just kind of sort of ponders for a while. And finally he turns to the kid and says with core seriousness, "You know, there's a lot of bastards out there." Now, that's pretty significant, I think. On the other hand, I've never made my residence in a stalactite-festooned cave high up on the northern massif of Chomolungma, Everest to you. I've never been sought out by fawning sycophants, whimpering to abase themselves before my wisdom, hungering to prostrate themselves to offer oblations at the altar of my Delphic insights. In short, unlike the great thinkers of our time who appear regularly on talk shows, Merv Griffin, Debbie Boone, Zsa Zsa Gabor, and Jim Nabors leap instantly to mind, I doubt that the Oxford Encyclopedia of Philosophy will ever crib from my notes. Nonetheless, having become something of an in-group cult figure among those with a high death wish profile and a taste for cheap thrills, I'm often asked, "What's the big secret, Ellison?" At the college lectures, for instance, bright-eyed young people, the great hope of our society, come to me and murmur in reverential tones, "Want to buy a lid of tough Filipino scarlet?" Naturally, I demonstrate a certain humility in the face of such trust and innocence. I try to explain that life is real, life is earnest. In my own toe-scuffling fashion, I attempt to encapsulate in 3 or 4 apocryphal phrases the ethical structures of the universe, the better to aid these fine young people as they set out to change the world. And from this long, terrifically fascinating life of encounters and adventures, I have selected 3 examples of what I think are the most important things in life. Note should be taken. This will count as 60% of your grade. 1. Sex. I could have started with one of the more esoteric of the 3, but I know your attention span is short, and in lieu of playing The Saints Go Marching In, I decided it was best to catch your notice with instant sleaze. Sex is one of the most important things in life. It it comes built into the machine. Understanding sex is real important, And it's not just enough to say all men are shits or what the fuck do women want. That's good for openers, but one must press on to deeper insights. As an aid to your greater search, I offer the following anecdote from my own humble experience, and only minimally exaggerated retelling of the single kinkiest sexual encounter I have ever had. When I got to Los Angeles in 1962, I was well into terminal destitution. Poverty would have been for me a sharp jump into a higher income bracket. Consequently, I wasn't getting laid much. More astute observers than I have charted the correlations between one's D&B rating and one's attraction for members of the same or opposite sex. Anyhow, I met this young woman at Stat's Charbroiler one afternoon and somehow conned her into accepting a date. It has been 15 years since that encounter, but I remember her name today as clearly as if it had been entangled on my brain with a jackhammer. Brenda. A substantially constructed female person, honey blonde of hair, amber of eye, insouciant of manner, and expansive of bosom. We exchanged pleasantries. I explained that I was new to L.A. and was, in fact, a published author. She went for it. I took her phone number and address and promised to pick her up the following Saturday night around 8 for a rollicking evening of camaraderie and good times, cleverly scaled to my non-existent finances. Long walks in the bracing night air, that kind of thing. Came Saturday, and I hand-washed the wretched 1951 Ford that brought me to California from Chicago and New York. I dressed as spiffly as I could manage, aware at all times of the fact that, having postponed a good number of meals, had dropped my weight to about 90 pounds, and I was beginning to take on the appearance of a card-carrying rickets case. I drove to her home, which was in the posh Brentwood section of Beverly Hills. I walked to the ornate apartment door of the Garden Lanai and rang the bell. Nothing happened. I waited and rang again. Nothing happened. Minutes passed, and I began thinking unworthy thoughts about Brenda's ethics. Finally, I heard footsteps from within, the door flung open. There stood Brenda in her slip, with machines in her hair. "Come in, come in," she said huffily, as if I had interrupted her at the precise moment when she had been decoding the DNA molecule or something equally as significant. I'm running a little late. I have to finish doing my hair. Well, come in already." I stepped into the foyer, standing on a ribbed plastic runner that stretched out into the distance. As she closed the door behind me, I began to take a step off the plastic stripping so the door wouldn't hit me. My foot was poised in mid-step, and she let out a shriek. "Ah! Not on the carpet! Mama had the Schwartz in today." I spun, widdershins, barely managing to balance myself on one leg like a flamingo. I steadied myself on the plastic runner and looked to my right, the direction my errant foot would have carried me. There, stretching off to the distant horizon, flooring a living room only slightly smaller than Bosnia and or Herzegovina, lay a pluperfect lunatic symbol of the upwardly mobile nouveau riche household. A white carpet, deepest pile, a veritable Sargasso sea of insane white carpet. Who but nutcases would carpet a room in which human beings are supposed to relax in white, for Christ's sake? With the nap pathologically lying all in one direction, clearly having been carpet swept by Nubian slave labor, so it was anal retentively flowing in one unbroken tide. Hours had been spent making sure each bloody fiber lay in that north by northwest direction. "Stay on the runner. I won't be long," Brenda commanded. "I've got to stay on the runner?" "Sure. Just stand. I'll only be out a minute." And she vanished, back into the bowels of the Cyclopean domicile, leaving me standing, frozen and tremulous in my baggy pants, while she went off to complete her toilette. The plastic runner extended out beneath my feet, back into the dim and vaulted interior. To my left, a closed door. To my right, the inviolate expanse of white carpeting and a living room in which Xerxes could easily have assembled his armies for an attack on the hot gates. I stood there, shifting from one foot to the other like a grade school troublemaker waiting for his audience with the principal. And time went by. Slowly, I waited and waited and heard nothing from the back of the residence. The living room looked invitingly comfortable with all those massive sofas and the huge baby grand piano, but I had been denied entrance. I felt like Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon, standing at the doorway to the antechamber of Tutankhamun's tomb, faunching to enter the space, unvisited for 3,000 years, but fearing the terrible wrath of "Beware all ye who violate this sacred place." Now, I don't know about you, friends, but if you leave me all alone someplace with nothing to amuse myself for any extended period of time, I will sure as shit get in trouble. And so, possessed by some devil demon from my childhood, I became obsessed by the purity of that goddamn carpet. I stared at its unblemished white expanse, that sea of bleached grass rippling away to forever. And finally, when it was either do something or go bug fuck, I stepped to the edge of the plastic runner, crouched, and jumped as far out into the carpet as I could. There was no way of knowing where I had come from. My footprints just magically appeared out there. I hesitated only a moment, and then, scuffling my feet to produce impressions in the carpet, I began spelling out the classic Chaucerian fuck, Phuque, and letters 4 feet high in virginal white carpet. And I was just putting the period on the exclamation point when I heard a strangled "Ah!" behind me. I turned, and there stood the missing Brenda, looking really pretty terrific, but with this, how should I put it, green expression on her face. "Oh, Jesus! Oh, my God! Oh, shit! My mother will kill me!" And she ran off, leaving me standing there rather shamefaced, wondering just which mental gargoyle had taken possession of the cathedral of my mind, knowing that there was no way I was going to get laid. Then, in a moment here she came, schlepping a carpet sweeper, not a vacuum cleaner, just one of your basic hand-pushed carpet sweepers, and she starts sweeping the nap back north by northwest. And I watched this demented scene for about 30 seconds until I got more than I could handle, and I yelled at her, "This is nuts! How the hell could you be a slave to a fucking carpet?" But she was in the grip of more powerful forces than my charisma. She was under the unbreakable spell of toilet training, and if the apocalypse had come along just then, she'd still have finished laying that nap back. I went crazy. I went for the sweeper. She pirouetted out of my reach. She never broke stroke. I lunged for her back and got my hands around the sweeper. She struggled back and forth across the living room, caroming with the furniture, lousing up the carpet worse than before. She fought like one of those lady barbarians out of a Conan adventure, punching and kicking. Then the sweeper went that way, and we went this way, and we fell over and wrestled over and over across the floor, thumping our heads and legs over and over, and I came up on top for a moment and pinned her arms and stared down at her, trying to catch my breath. And in that instant, I perceived a mad light glowing out of her eyes, and she murmured huskily, "Hit me." Oh, shit. Now, you gotta understand, I'm a quiet, well-mannered Jewish kid from Ohio. Not even years sunk to the hips in the flesh pots of New York, Chicago, London, and Billings, Montana have been able to sully the rigidly puritanical morals that have led me to the pinnacle of success and clear complexion you see before you today. To put it simply, I was terrified. After all that time, at long last, despite my best efforts at avoidance, I'd encountered one of those kind of ladies. Beg pardon? I said weakly. "Hit me," she said again. The lights in her eyes strobed. "Hit you? Punch me around a little bit. I love it. But don't leave marks. Just hurt me some." Oh, shit. She was watching me, naked lust in her face, her lips wet with unconcealed desire. Nice Jewish kid from Ohio, but what the hell, I'm adaptable. Bogart asserted himself. My voice dropped 4 octaves. "You like a little smacking around, right, sweetheart?" She nodded, bonking her head on the carpet. "Okay," I said roughly. "Get naked." She looked troubled for a moment. "Naked?" "Now," I said in my voice a brutal rasp. I got off her. I stood over her as she stripped out of her clothes. Her eyes slitted, my jaw tensed. I watched silently. When she was naked, and pretty terrific she was, I might add, I said, "Okay, lie on your back." She lay down again. For a crazed moment, I wanted to tell her to make an angel, the way we used to do it back when there was a heavy snow in Ohio. You lie on your back and flap your arms up and down, making angel wings. But I didn't. That would have been really crazy. The heavy drapes on the living room windows were secured by thick gold cord ropes with tassels. I unhooked 4 of them. I wrapped one around her left leg, secured it, and tied it to one leg of the baby grand. Then I did the same with her right leg and attached it to the piano at the other side. Then one arm stretched above her head and fastened it to a leg of the massive sectional sofa. The other arm to another post of the sofa. She was spread-eagled right in the middle of the word fuck, without the period. Out flat on her back, her perspiring body trembling with barely restrained passion. "Can you move?" She tried, then shook her head. "Tied down tight? Can't get loose?" She nodded again, breathing raggedly. "Terrific," I said, heading for the door. "Say hello to your mama for me, and thank her for the chicken soup." And I ran for my life. All I could think of was when her mother got home that night and found her baby girl staked out like a gazelle at the waterhole. She'd take one look at that monstrous scene and start screaming, "My carpet!" You asked me if sex is one of the most important things in life. Absolutely. But the lack of it is even likelier to drive you nuts. Number 2. Violence. Not the pale, pallid, nonsense Starsky and Hutch indulge in every week. Real violence. Sudden, inexplicable, ghastly. How seldom we see it. How unhinged we become in the face of it. Because when it really happens, when it manifests itself on its most primitive, amoral level, we understand how fragile the tissue of social behavior. In a life singularly filled with violence, only one sticks out with even close competition as the most horrendously violent moment I ever witnessed. I tell it briefly. Even today, years later, my blood runs cold remembering. New York, early 70s, maybe 73, 74. I was in the city on business taken care of. I got together with a friend, a writer from Texas who loves movies as much and as indiscriminately as I do. The ritual, the movie crawl. Load up on junk food, start at the first movie theater on the downtown side of 42nd Street, and just work our way from Times Square to 8th Avenue, cross the street, and work our way back to Times Square. Days, endless days, 24, 36, 48 hours, straight time in the dark. We eat in there, sleep in there, piss and daydream in there. Hot dogs, popcorn, slabs of cheese, munchies, French bread, any damn thing. And we see them all. The good flicks, the bad flicks, the kung fu operas, the porn jobs, the Superfly, Stomp the Patty flicks. All of them. One after another, till our eyes turn to poached eggs, staggering from theater to theater like refugees from a Macau opium den. I don't remember the name of the particular theater, but it was on the uptown side of 42nd Street, close to Broadway. It was something like 4 a.m. My buddy and I were almost totally cacked out. I remember the double bill, however. The lower half, the B feature, was Fear is the Key, a really dreadful action-adventure turkey based on a crummy Alistair MacLean novel. The main feature was Save the Tiger, a contemporary drama starring Jack Lemmon. He won the Oscar for the role in that film. And there we slumped, way the hell up in the balcony, our knees jammed under our chins, best seats in an almost empty house. 4 a.m. 2 rows below us, and it was steep up there. What I'm talking here is damn near perpendicular. Some black dude was juiced out asleep, lying across 3 or 4 seats snoring. My buddy, the Texas writer, is dead asleep, having polished off a recent meal of 3 boxes of Good and Plenty and a frozen chocolate-covered banana on a stick. And blessedly, Fear is the Key ends, and Save the Tiger begins. About 10 minutes into this serious study of a garment setter guy who's killing himself with floating ethics, and from the very first row of the balcony, below and to the right of us, but still very high above the floor of the theater, I hear a shrieky black voice start mouthing off. Dialogue straight out of $100 Misunderstanding. Motherfucker! Goddamn motherfucker, stupid piece of shit! Dumb some bitch, cocksucking piece of shit garbage! Leroy! Hey, you some bitch nigga prick, Leroy! Let's get the fuck out of here, Leroy! Clearly, the critic in the first row of the balcony found this deeply penetrating study of middle-class morality as seen through the dissolution of Jack Lemmon's knockoff sweatshop less than relevant to his existence as a mid-20th century denizen of the shitty slum to whence he would wend his way once this stupid kike film about motherfucking honk-patty bastards ended. Which wasn't soon enough for him. Leroy! I had the feeling that Leroy was the terminal case lying over the seats 2 rows below us. Out of it. Well, I peer through the gloom and see the dude out down there in the front row of the balcony, his feet up on the brass rail, his partner beside him, silently watching the film, but not stopping the noise. And I watched the 2 of them for a little while, hoping the 3rd member of the group, good old Leroy, will bestir his ass and go rejoin them there, Sepia, Athos, and Porthos, and maybe, just maybe, vacate the site quietly so I can watch the goddamn motherfucking movie. But no such luck. The critic only gets wonkier, yelling at the top of his lungs, Leroy, don't twitch a bum. And just as the critic is reaching a pitch that will cause sonic tremors, squealing sunbitch and motherfucker at the top of his lungs, from behind me, I hear the voice of doom. Shut your face, nigga, before I come down there and kill you. Pause with me for a nano instant. This was not one of those angrily shouted shut-ups one encounters all too frequently these days in pillbox-sized cinema 1, 2, 3, 4 closets, filled with slope-browed, prognathous-jawed pimple brains who jabber endlessly as though they were still in front of the tube in their living room. This was, trust me, the most blood-curdlingly threatening voice I have ever heard. It was the kind of voice one suspected would accompany the body attached to the moving finger writing Mene Mene Tekel in letters of fire. This was an abominable snowman, a tyrannosaurus, a behemoth, a stone-righteous motherfucking killer. Deep, resonant, commanding, powerful, and very, very black. I don't want to belabor this, but whatever was sitting back up there behind my Texas buddy and me, it was bad. Beside me, I felt the hand of my Texican partner on my wrist. Softly he asked, "What the fuck was that?" Voice of doom, I said. Pretend we're black, better still, pretend we're at another theater. All this happened in a second, and only an idiot would have talked back to the owner of that voice. Guess whose name was in the envelope in the category of most outstanding performance by an idiot? You got it. Leroy's buddy with the scoop shovel mouth. Is violence important in this life? The critic started shrieking. Who said that? Who said that? Goddamn shitting me. You come on down here, nigga. I'm gonna cut you. I'm gonna cut on you, nigga motherfucker. And he did go on and on and on. Oh, shit, I murmured, slumping down even deeper in the seat till my knees were up around my ears like a grasshopper. Beside me, my Texican buddy was praying in high church Latin, Yiddish, and Sufi all at the same time. I do believe that the joker down in the first row of that cockroach-ridden movie house was the single dumbest son of a bitch I have ever encountered. And what happened next was the swiftest, most deadly moment of violence I've ever seen. Motormouth was still working on the conjugation of to cut, when suddenly and without warning there was a rush of wind past me. Down those steps, fast, so damn fast, I couldn't make out whether it was a human or a yeti or simply some terrifying force of nature, and all I saw was a dark blur as something big moved smoothly down to the front row. Something gigantic moved into that row, and that stupid son of a bitch Joker just stood up, still working his wet jaw as if he could do something against that huge dude come to silence him, and that monstrous black fury just grabbed Motormouth by the shirt front and yanked and pitched him headfirst over the rail. I heard a terrified scream as the guy fell, and then a sickening crack, like the snapping of a Tang Dynasty chopstick. And then there was silence. The only sounds were Jack Lemmon talking about what emotional violence he was suffering. Shut up, Lemmon. No one in the theater moved. There weren't many people anyhow, just my buddy and me and sleeping Leroy, and the buddy of the guy who'd taken the dive, and that humongous shape in the balcony. And if there was anyone down below, they weren't saying anything. The diver's buddy didn't move or look around or say a word. He just sat there staring straight ahead, as if he could not possibly have found anything more interesting in the universe to think about than Jack Lemmon's problems. The dark shape moved back up the aisle. I didn't look left or right. I saw nothing, Jim, nothing. And it went past me and was gone. I watched that entire flick in silence. No one moved to see if the diver was still alive. After a moment's wait, the diver's buddy slipped out of the balcony like oil washing down a gutter and gone. From below, nothing. And when the film was finished and the lights came up, we rose, turned slowly. The balcony was empty. Leroy was still tabula rasa. Just us, all alone. I looked at my buddy from Texas, and he looked at me. Without saying a word, we walked down that precarious stairway and came to the railing and peered over. The diver lay across the back of a shattered seat. He was bent double, stomach up. His spine was broken. He didn't move. The theater was empty. We walked back up the aisle, through the upper vestibule, down the winding staircase, into the lobby and out. We didn't look back. No one could help the diver. We wanted to get away. We never spoke of it to each other. It was sudden. Not a word, not a second threat, no false heroics like two stumble bums in an alley outside a bar, no fainting and swinging. He just threw him, launched him out into eternity, and walked away from it. Because he was being disturbed in a movie. Violence, real violence, not the Jack Armstrong nonsense we all play act at. Genuine, mindless violence is very important. Because there is no knowing when it will strike, and there is no escape from it. I warn you, it's terrible. 3. Labor relations. At least half our waking life is spent trying to make ends meet. Slouching after the buck, keeping the rain off our heads. That means earning a living. Aren't you glad I clarified it for you? And whether you're on the paycheck or self-employed, whether you wait in line for the dole or cat burgle through windows in the wee hours, with relations with them as has the money are vital. Not getting the employer pissed off, maintaining a posture that makes you indispensable cannot be too strenuously stressed. One of the most important lessons one can learn in this tragic life, therefore, is what it takes to stay employed. And since almost any job will eventually drive you to erratic behavior, thus precipitating getting your tuchus laid off, I offer the following heart-rending anecdote from my virtually cornucopial stock of life experiences as a classic example of what not to do. One day, about 10 years ago, I was sitting in this little treehouse I rented in Beverly Glen, a sort of arboreal Bambi-land section of Los Angeles, just on the Tobacco Road side of Bel Air and Beverly Hills. What I'm talking here is artsy, craftsy, but poor as a shul mouse. A shul is a synagogue. As a Jew, I'm not allowed to have church mice. That's okay. They're treif. Really a treehouse. I'm not making this up. See, because half the house sat on a rock ledge up a private little street called Bushrod Lane that was mostly only a kind of paved pathway better suited to fugitives from a James Fenimore Cooper book than this upwardly struggling young writer trying to bludgeon his way into movies and the other half of the treehouse, that is. Am I going too fast for you? Was in the crotch of a big eucalyptus tree, and it only cost me $135 a month, which was back then at a time before everything was crazy in terms of what it costs to live decently these days. And $135 was not the biggest rent you could pay, but I wasn't all that cushy either, and so I was sitting there when the phone rang, and it was Marty the agent. And he says to me, "Walt Disney wants you." Now, I don't know what you think constitutes an ominous remark, but as Walt Disney had gone to collect his reward from the great consortium organizer in the sky, at least 2 years prior to this call from Marty the agent, immediate thoughts of some Lovecraftian horror beckoning to me from the crypt. Who? Walt wants you? Went pitter-pattering through my tiny brain. But as it turned out, I was never to find out if there was truth to the much bandied underground rumor that Walt had been flash frozen cryogenically with an eye to restoring him in the 21st century, or at worst stuffing him and putting him on display like Trigger. What it boiled down to, improbably, was that someone had read one of my science fiction stories somewhere and thought I'd be a terrific little fella to have write a kinda sorta SF film Disney was thinking of making. My reaction to Disney Wants You was horror, and then stark amazement. "There's been a mistake," I said to Marty the agent. "I am a crazed, radical, bomb-throwing loon who writes stories about things that come up out of the toilets to bite off babies' asses. Are you sure they don't want Bob Ellison? He writes comedy, very clean-cut guy, drives a late-model car, shaves regularly, never says fuck in mixed company. You sure they mean me, Marty? I'm Harlan Ellison, remember? The one with the hook for a hand?" "No," says Marty the agent, who has been my theatrical agent, as opposed to my literary agent, who is Bob the agent, as well as my friend for over 15 years. "No, they have clearly lost their minds, and they want you. And I've made a nice little week-to-week deal for you with a guaranteed 6 and options." And he named a figure that might not purchase San Simeon in these crazy days of lettuce going for $3 a head, but back then, 10 years ago, was more money than anyone had ever offered me for anything, including my body. Contracts are coming, Marty said, but go over to the Disney studio tomorrow morning. They have an office for you. I was in heaven. So, okay, it wasn't writing the great American cinematic answer to Potemkin, but so what? I was on my way. I was going to work in the studio. It was the big time. And just to get up in the part of a successful scenarist, I dragged out my complete collection of Uncle Scrooge McDuck comics and reread them all, till the night had passed away and the morning had come. I dressed smartly, put on the one tie I owned, looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the treehouse, and went back in and took off the tie and put on a shirt first. Okay, so I was excited. Shoot me. I drove out the Ventura Highway to the Buena Vista exit, drove up the front gate to the disreputable 1951 Ford I mentioned earlier, which hadn't been washed in so long that strangers wrote "cleanliness is next to godliness" obscenities in the dirt, and gave my name to the spiffy guard of the kiosk. "Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Ellison," he said, validating my existence. "Your office is in the Writers' Building." I beamed. How do I get there? I asked. He smiled exactly the same way as Doc of Seven Dwarfs fame and said, "Well, you drive in here and take the first left. That's Mickey Mouse Avenue. Then you go down Mickey Mouse Avenue till you hit Thumper Boulevard. Turn right on Thumper to Clarabelle Cow Way and take another left. Go straight down Clarabelle Cow Way till you hit the corner of Horace Horsecollar Drive, and the Riders Building is second building on your right." I think I nodded dumbly, refusing to believe what I had just been told. But I drove in, and sure as shit, there was Mickey Mouse Avenue and Thumper Boulevard and all the rest of them. And I said to myself, "Ellison, you has fallen down a rabbit hole, kid." But right there, in front of the building to which I'd been directed, was a parking slot that said H. Ellison. Right there on the blacktop, between the thick white lines, some industrious auto-animatronic robot, possibly cobbled up in the image of Matisse or Lindner, had stenciled my name for eternity, or 6 weeks with options, whichever came first. To those of you out there in the great American heartland, that may not be such a significant thing. But in the world of studio sign cures, a parking space of one's own is dearer to the heart than never being put on hold when calling the networks. I know Sammy Glick Manx who have given up perks and titles and even a Bigelow on the floor just for a parking space with the name thereon. So there I had it, authentication of my elevated status in the universe of the soon-to-be hot stuff. I walked into the building, and on the register, I found my name and office number, walked upstairs, followed the numbers till I found my office, and opened the door. There was a 2-room suite with bathroom. The room I entered was antechamber, and there, sitting behind her desk, reading a paperback nurse novel, was my secretary. No, change that from period to 3 exclamation points. You should have seen her. This remarkable creature was so lean, I could see dust motes taking 90-degree turns as they fell, just so they wouldn't mar her perfection. A smile that would solve all the energy dilemmas of the TVA. Peter Pan collar on the blouse, Malibu blonde, periwinkle blue eyes, a Goyish nose that would make Streisand climb a wall, a freshly minted 6-pack of dimples, most of which were visible. "May I help you?" she said. You're probably too young to remember, but the part of Adelaide in the original stage production of Guys and Dolls was played by Vivian Blaine, an accomplished actress who had the most amazing dumb blonde voice ever bottled. Not even Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday could approach the level of stupidity orally conveyed by Miss Blaine's rendition of the nitwit. Only once in the more than a quarter century since Guys and Dolls opened on Broadway have I heard a voice, male or female, that rivaled for strident, full-out dumbass. The voice of Adelaide. "May I help you?" she said. I'm Harlan Ellison," I replied. I think this is my office." Such instant attentiveness, such perky willingness to serve. "We don't do windows or floors. Could she get me coffee? Could she type me some script? Could she file some reports? Could she read my tarot?" I pointed out that I was just arriving and that it was my first day on the job, and, since I had no idea what I was doing, nor even the nature of what the project was to be, I really needed only one bit of assistance. "Is that my office in there?" She indicated that the connecting room was, in fact, the holiest of holies, where, she was certain, I would create great moments in cinematic history. I thanked her, suggested she return to the contretemps of nurse and doctor, and advanced post-nasal drip, and I'd call her when I needed her. In the background, I heard mental riffs by Dan Hicks in his Hot Licks. I went into my office. They could have staged the World Cup soccer matches in there. One sofa, too short to sleep on, one wall of bookcases save for a well-thumbed copy of the 1948 World Almanac, one framed painting depicting Beanfield hands laboring under a blistering sun. I wondered if that was intended by management as metaphor. one desk the size of the battleship Potemkin, and I wondered if that was intended by management to be as metaphor. One typing table supporting an enormous IBM Selectric, already humming with life, one roll-around typing chair, and on the desk, an even dozen number 2 Dixon Ticonderoga pencils, sharpened to such a piercing sharpness that they seemed to strobe off into invisibility at the points. Tony Curtis could have dueled with those pencils. I didn't have the heart to tell you when I typed manuscripts straight onto the machine. My handwriting is in the top 10th of the top percentile of illegible scrawls. I sat down and waited for someone to come and tell me what they wanted me to write. To tell me at least the name of the picture. But an hour went by and nothing happened. As I've pointed out earlier, left to my own devices, I get into trouble. Deep trouble. So, bored out of my brain, I rose, went into the office where Barbie sat with furrowed brow, pondering the mysteries of infections and abscesses of the submaxillary parotid gland, and said, "I'm going to look around. Be back in a bit." The smile fried my eyeballs like a ping-pong ball in a cyclotron, and I stumbled into the hall. I started checking out the other offices, and to my utter delight, there were at least a half dozen writers I knew, ensconced in plaza suites similar to mine. The wonderful thing about it was that most of them were loons like me. I'd name them, but since most of you can't even remember the names of authors of books, names of scenarios like Albert Ailey and John D.F. Black and Mary C. McCall Jr. don't mean shit to you. Suffice to say, we all found ourselves gathered in John's office, shucking and jiving till almost noon, at which point someone said, "Okay, let's break for lunch." I thought that was a terrific idea, having put in an exhausting 3 hours' work in the Disney vineyards. So we went to the commissary and shoved in around the writer's table. What I did not know was that the writer's table was right behind the producer's banquette. That was my first big mistake. As it turned out, it was also my last big mistake. Oh, what fun, sitting there with intellectual companions, cutting up touches and laughing at the drolleries. Born again, the Algonquin Round Table. Wit beyond compare, and naturally, as the youngest member of the group, striving to make my mark as worthy of their camaraderie, their respect, I suggested a droll, witty lunchtime conceit. 2 things you must first know. First, I do a terrific Mickey Mouse imitation. Absolutely phonographically perfect. If the publishers of this book had the money, they ought to bind in a record, one of those little plastic jobbies, so you could hear my spectacular Mickey imitation. When I tell this anecdote in person, it really enhances a lot. But just pretend you can hear it, okay? The second thing you need to know is that the producer's banquette had filled up with Roy Disney and the other heads of the studio behind me, a fact of which I was unaware, a fact no one bothered to impart. At the top of my voice, I suggested, "Hey, listen, what a kick! Why don't we do a porn Disney flick?" Everyone smiled. "It'll be terrific," I said loudly. "I mean, everyone knows, for instance, that Tinkerbell does it. What they don't know is how she does it." They all looked at me expectantly. "She flies up the head of the penis and flaps her wings like crazy," I said, proud as hell of myself at this bit of fantasy. Everyone chuckled. I went on, oblivious to the sudden hush all around me in the commissary. "I'll be Mickey, and I'll be the director. John, you do a good Donald, so you can be the male porn lead, sort of a duck-style Harold Ramis. Mary, you can be Minnie, the female lead, and Albert, you can be Goofy. And Goofy, of course, is the producer." Their smiles were frozen. The way the smiles of bit players get frozen when they see a monster creeping behind the hero in a horror flick. "Hey, gang," I said I squeaked in my terrifically accurate Mickey voice. "Everybody ready to shoot the ultimate Disney flick? The film that rips the lid off the goody two-shoes hypocrisy that lies sweltering beneath the surface of G-rated true-life adventures? Okay, you guys, let's get the handheld Aeroflex right down there between Minnie's legs. I want to see close-ups of quivering labia." a silence as deep as the bottom of the Cayman Trench. I went on, oblivious, carried along by my enthusiasm. In Donald's quack, I said, "Bitch, you're skinny up the lungs." As goofy and the dumbest voice possible, I said, "Yuck, yuck, yuck. Hey, fellas, I'm a highly paid, extremely adept producer person. Can I play too?" As Mickey, "Fuck off, Goofy, fuck off. Get those 7 dwarfs in here. I don't care if they don't want to gangbang a mouse. Tell them they're under contract. And for Christ's sake, Minnie, will you take off those goddamn shoes?" The meal came. Everyone addressed their plates like inmates of the Gulag Archipelago. When lunch was over, everyone vanished very quickly. I was confused, but felt good. What a nice little shtick I invented. Wish they'd joined in. Oh, well. Went back to my office. Noticed first that my name had been whited out in the parking lot. Upstairs, the secretary and her paperback were gone. On my desk, 12 sharpened No. 2 Ticonderoga pencils and a pink slip. I had been fired after working for the Disney Empire for a total of 4 hours, including lunch. The lessons here cannot be avoided. Big business is humorless. And, at Disney, nobody fucks with the mouse.
Wow. That was pretty special.
Oh, thank you.
That was pretty good. I enjoyed that.
Oh.
I think people listening enjoyed that too. I will commend you on your voice work, my friend.
Oh, thank you. I apologize for the Donald Duck impression. I've been working on it for a week straight, and I'm not even close.
It wasn't coming?
No.
Yeah.
I think my Mickey was okay, though.
Mickey was all right. I was surprised at the nuance of Mickey. There was a couple of voices that I was surprised at the nuance on. Wow. Well, I'll tell you what's funny is that because I didn't know the stories, I didn't know where any of that was going.
Okay.
And in that classic kind of story structure way, he does this thing where you don't know where it's going until it kind of gets there. Yeah. You can feel some of it kind of coming, like, you can kind of like, anticipate a little bit. Mm-hmm. But once he's through the structure of the first lesson, then it's a little bit easier to see the framework. Mm-hmm. But interesting twists to each of those. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, I think at this point,
yeah, hope you enjoyed it.
I think we'll say thanks for listening to anybody who's enjoying this. And if they want to let us know, they can email at podcast@Wicked Theory, or they can contact Ed at Edward O'Hare, TBD, on Twitter.
Twitter, yes.
And let them know what they think of it, and if they want to hear something else maybe, or something more, if they just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear feedback on it. Mm-hmm. If you enjoyed this, or want to pay your respect to Harlan Ellison, check out Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, CBLDF.
And again, the book this was read from is Stalking the Nightmare.
Yes.
And that's just a small piece of what's in there. It's it's a good sized book. It's got a lot of writings in there.
Yes, and there's short stories, there's essays. It's a whole hodgepodge. Mm-hmm. And some of the fantasy stories in there are breathtaking.
All right. Any of the classics? Any of his more popular classics in that assemblage?
I mean, to be honest, I'm not as familiar
with his overall works.
Yeah, with his overall works, but I've always enjoyed the stuff that's in here.
All right. Mm-hmm. With that, folks, we'll say thanks for listening, and maybe you'll hear another special episode soon.
Maybe. We'll see.
Thanks. Bye-bye.